Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Radio Books. My name is Gunnar. I'm living in Sweden, but I'm originally from Germany. Today it's Saturday and autumn has come. I mean, if I look outside, I showed you a little glimpse of how it looks outside. It's a rainy Saturday today and not very attractive to go out and walk and to do the daily Corona walk. But also I want to fulfill the task of the autumn tag that Karen tagged me in her video, I think last week. And I found a solution that is pretty different, maybe from what she intended to do, but I think I like it anyway. So I do it. My channel, my rules. Well, let's get started. And let me do the autumn tag for the rest of this video. The tag that Karen made in her channel was that we should have 13 books that are dealing with autumn or with Halloween. So I have 13 titles, but these aren't novels necessarily. I have some poems for you, I have some books for you. And since I read a lot of thrillers in my life, I have some of the best that I've read so far and some authors that you might want to explore, that you might want to read more of. The first poem that is actually Hamnet won the prize on Wednesday, the International Women's Prize. It's a novel about William Shakespeare's son Hamnet and William Shakespeare and his wife and his other children. Here is a poem by William Shakespeare for you about autumn, and I quote it. And I hope that this is Shakespeare in English, please oversee if I cannot pronounce everything right. This is sonnet number 73, which some of you might know. That time of year thou mayst in me behold. A sonnet by William Shakespeare. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold. Bare ruined choirs where late the sweet bird sang, in me thou seest the twilight of such day as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self as seals up all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as the death-bed whereon it must expire, consumed with what which it was nourished by. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave here long. And from Shakespeare, we jump over to little books, because now it's chronological, very chronological, I think. An author that has already in my school years, because we read him in school when I had English, and I think we also read him in German translation, was the master of American madness and horror. He's still the namesake of one of the most important awards in crime fiction, Edgar Allan Poe, of course. The Edgars are handed out each and every year. And I should do videos about the Edgars next year. This is from Edgar Allan Poe from 1809 to 1849. I would recommend to you The Best of Poe. And here you got The Telltale Heart, The Raven, The Cask of Amontillado, and 30 others. I remember when I was growing up in the 1970s, in 1976, I actually looked it up yesterday, there was a band from Great Britain called the Alan Parsons Project. And they made a beautiful Poe-inspired record that is called Tales of Mystery and Imagination. That's about, all the songs are inspired by Edgar Allan Poe, and you have The Raven there, which was a big, not a hit, but it was among my friends, among my affiliates, it was a very popular record. And here I read you something from The Telltale Heart. If you never have read Poe, you get a little excerpt here as well. It's from The Telltale Heart, written in 1843, and it's typical Poe, a Poish start, so to speak. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am, but will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then? Am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me, he had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. That's how The Telltale Heart starts, by Edgar Allan Poe, which is perfect reading for autumn, perfect reading for Halloween, scary reading, that I can tell you. The next book comes from Ireland. Actually, the author was Irish. He published his greatest work in 1897. If you haven't read that, go and read it. You have seen many, many filmatizations of the character that he invented. It is, of course, from Ireland, Dracula in 1897. And even from that book, which is written in different journals, I read you a short excerpt from Dracula. That is when they're traveling to Transylvania, and they're moving closer to the castle where the Count Dracula is living. So here is my excerpt from this book. Then a dog began to howl somewhere in a farmhouse far down the road, agonized wailing as if from fear. The sound was taken up by another dog, another and another, till borne on the wind, which now sighed softly through the pass, a wild howling began, which seemed to come from all over the country, as far as the imagination could grasp it, through the gloom of the night. At the first howl, the horses began to strain and rear, but the driver spoke to them soothingly, and they quieted down, but shivered and sweated as though after a runaway from sudden fright. Then, far off in the distance, from the mountains on each side, began a louder and a sharper howling, that of wolves, which affected both the horses and myself in the same way, for I was minded to jump from the calash and run, whilst they reared again and plunged madly, so that the driver had to use all his great strength to keep them from bolting. So that is Graf Dracula, and I read that many, many years ago, and it's so perfectly written. This is the classic Gothic horror novel, Dracula, and so many movies. This is really first-class Gothic horror, Graf Dracula. Now, something completely different. We come into the 20th century, where I was born, where I grew up, and we come to crime novels, and crime novels that I really love, and that I really would recommend to you, and even writers that I would recommend to you to read if you haven't read them, if you don't know them. One of them is Raymond. Everybody knows Raymond Chandler and The Big Sleep and The Long Goodbye, to name his two most famous novels. But do you know Ross Macdonald? When I was reading Chandler when I was like in my late teens or my early 20s, I was so fascinated by this noir of Los Angeles, California, and this Philip Marlowe guy that I wanted to read more and more and more. But then I didn't find more of Marlowe and of Chandler, but I found Ross Macdonald. Ross Macdonald, his actual name, he's a Canadian author, actually, who lived in the United States. His name was Kenneth Miller, and he was married to a very famous author named Margaret Miller. Since Margaret was writing a lot of books, he gave himself a pseudonym to write his detective novels, and he chose Ross Macdonald. And it's also Los Angeles, California, and it's the name of the private eye is Lou Archer. And I think there are more than 10 Lou Archer novels. And I would recommend to you today to get into Archer and Ross Macdonald's world, The Drowning Pool. The Drowning Pool was was published in 1950. It's a story about a millionaire matriarch who's found floating face down in the family pool. The prime suspects are her good-for-nothing son and his seductive teenage daughter. In The Drowning Pool, Lou Archer takes this case in the LA suburbs and encounters a moral wasteland of corporate greed and family hatred and sufficient motive for a dozen murders. That is amazing noir literature about Los Angeles. You should absolutely read Ross Macdonald if you haven't done it. This book that was written and published in 1950 was made into a movie. It was filmatized in 1975 by Stuart Rosenberg, and Lou Archer is played by nobody else but Paul Newman in that movie. I have another novel for you that was published in 1964 that was also filmatized by Roman Polanski. Polanski, a very, very complicated personality, as you know. I think he's still sort of warrant after him in the United States because he has sexually assaulted minors, underage girls in the United States, and this is horrible. On the other hand, Polanski was one of the greatest filmmakers in the history of film after the Second World War, I think. And that's just such a pity. And this, of course, would open up a door to talk about cancel culture, which I don't do here. But The Tenant is a movie that Polanski made after a novel by Roland Topor. Roland Topor is a Polish, he's a French author. And Topor wrote his novel. The Tenant chronicles a harrowing, fascinating descent into madness as the pathologically alienated Tchaikovsky is subsumed to Simon Schul, an enigmatic suicide whose presence saturates his new apartment. More than a tale of possession, the novel probes disturbing depths of guilt, paranoia, and sexual obsession with an unsparing detachment. This is a very... I haven't read the novel, actually. I saw the film by Polanski and with Polanski in the leading role, and this is such a breathtaking thriller of madness and maybe related to Edgar Allan Poe in a way. The original title is so beautiful. The Tenant is called in French, in the French original version, Le Locataire Chimérique. Le Locataire Chimérique, published in 1964. The Tenant in English. We jump into the 90s already now, from 1964 to 1991. Since I'm living in Sweden, I thought I at least have to give you two authors from the Scandinavian noir genre. And I think the greatest Swedish author was, unfortunately he's already dead, died a couple of years ago, Henning Mankell. Henning Mankell has sold, I think, 20-30 million books in the whole world, primarily of his character of his Inspector Kurt Wallander, a man who is in his 40s and 50s in the novels. Kurt Wallander is in his 40s and 50s in his novels. He's a melancholic character, a lovable character, a tortured character, tortured by the time and his life, which is not easy for him, but he's a very great policeman. And the novel that started the series of Kurt Wallander in Sweden and then all over the world, it was his novel Mördare utan ansikte that was published in 1991, which was translated into English and is called Faceless Killers, which is the exact translation, more or less the exact translation of Mördare utan ansikte. This is about a Skåne farmer. Skåne is in southern Sweden, the most southern part of the country. Somewhere, and it's a very rural area. You have the city of Malmö, you have some other cities and towns there, but you have a very rural part which is actually farmland traditionally. And there's a farm in Skåne, and an old couple, Johannes Löfgren and his wife Maria, they are found dead on their farm. They have been tortured savagely, they have been murdered horribly, and Kurt Wallander is introduced as his first case. He's on the case together with his team, Rydberg, Martinsson, Svedberg, Hansson and Peters. And in the beginning, Maria Löfgren is alive, the woman, but she's getting into hospital. Her husband is dead, but she dies after a couple of days, and all she can say about, she's awake for a few moments, and all she can say about the perpetrators, about the killers, is that they are looking for him. And this starts a series, a wave of xenophobia in southern Sweden, which is actually really realistic, because the movement of the so-called Sweden Democrats, the right-wing party that is already in the Swedish parliament, started in southern Sweden, and they have the strongest base down there. And Henning Mankell introduces his inspector, introduces his kind of cases that are always pretty brutal, pretty horrific things that happen there, but always are connected to Swedish and European society and the way it is moving to, and the direction it is moving to. Mankell is really a very good craftsman of writing through this. I really recommend him to you. The story focuses on Sweden's liberal attitude regarding immigration and explores themes of racism and national identity, it says here from the publishers. And now it's time for another poem. Poem time. And here we go to the United States, to a beautiful American poet that I discovered very early actually in my life. And this is Robert Frost, who lived from 1874 to 1963. And this autumn poem by, or fall poem by Frost is called Nothing Gold Can Stay. I love it. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaves a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf. So Eden sank to grieve, so dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. So beautiful. I love it. Another crime novel, another author. You know that I like, love, that I adore Michael Connelly. Michael Connelly has been called the Chandler of our times. So we're back to the 1940s and 50s with to Raymond Chandler and Ross Macdonald. It's Los Angeles again, but in our time. And Connelly has in his work created a couple of characters. Of course, the most iconic is Hieronymus, called Harry Bosch, the inspector of the LAPD. But he has also created some admirable and great side characters, like the one like Jake McAvoy, the journalist, that I actually reviewed the book Fair Warning, which is the latest Connelly book that was published. Or Mickey Haller, the attorney that is the Lincoln lawyer, beautifully played by Matthew McConaughey in the movie with the same title. And he has also created a guy called Terry McCaleb. And I think Terry is in two novels, or two or three novels by Michael Connelly. I had to do a little break because the camera overheated, so we're back at work. Michael Connelly, I talked about Michael Connelly, about Los Angeles, and his novel Bloodwork is, I think, a very good start into his work if you haven't read him before. I saw the movie first, and this is by Clint Eastwood, with Clint Eastwood in the leading role. Clint Eastwood plays a retired police officer who had to retire because he got a donor heart. He has a new heart, a second heart, because he had a heart attack while following a serial killer. Serial killer was jumping over a wall. Clint Eastwood is, which is Terry McCaleb in the movie, is following him, trying to climb up that wall, and suddenly his heart fails, he falls down, and then cut. He's retired, he's working, he's not working anymore, he's living on a boat, on a houseboat, and then comes Gabriela Rivera to see him. This is a woman who wants him to investigate her sister's killing. And he doesn't want to do it, he says, no, I'm retired, why don't you come to me? And in the end, the woman Rivera says to Clint Eastwood, to Terry McCaleb, I want you to investigate the murder of my sister because you are living with her heart. And that, of course, makes him to investigate the case. This is really a great case. I mean, the story, think of that, to imagine such a story, such a plot. It's really a great story and a great movie. So both of them are really, really worth seeing. Bloodwork, the novel, and Bloodwork, the movie. The next author is I think he's listed now as Canadian, but he actually comes from the United Kingdom, but he has been living in Canada for many, many, many years. But he writes about England, about Eastvale, I think, is the place where what he's writing about, in his novels about Inspector. Now I think now it's Chief Superintendent, Inspector, whatever, Allan Banks, and his the police officer Annie Cabot. These are the two main characters of the crime novels of Peter Robinson. And the one that you should look at to get into his work was actually also the novel that I read. The first Robinson novel I read was Aftermath. Aftermath is, I think, right in the middle of his work around Inspector Banks, and this is about police being called to a house in Eastvale because the neighbors complained they had heard voices, they had heard screamings and whatever. So the police goes to that house and they get in, and after a while they find the cellar or the garage, and they find a man who has just killed a woman, Terence Payne. His wife, he's arrested, and actually the novel could be over after 20 pages. But his wife, Lucy Payne, that's the great question of that novel. Did she know what her husband did? Or is it true what she says, that she didn't know anything, that she never knew anything about that her husband killed 5 or 6 women in that garage and tortured them and held them captive? That's the question that Allan Banks and Annie Cabot are investigating. And it's a very, very beautiful police procedure novel that takes you into the world of Inspector Allan Banks and his assistant Annie Cabot. And there's also a sequel to that, not really a sequel, but a novel where Lucy Payne, the character that we get introduced to in Aftermath, returns. She returns, no spoilers. This novel is called Friend of the Devil, and you should read Aftermath and you should read Friend of the Devil by Peter Robinson. Maybe all of his novels about Inspector Allan Banks, because you get addicted to them. Second Scandinoir author that I would recommend to you is from Norway. I love Norway. It's a beautiful country, one of the most beautiful countries on earth, I guess. And Bergen, you would call it in English. Bergen, as they say in Norwegian, is a city in the west of Norway. It's a beautiful train ride, one of the most beautiful train rides in the world, to go from Oslo to Bergen by train. You have to do it. It takes like 7, 8, 9 hours. It's so beautiful. I did it twice, and there are hundreds of photo ops on the way, tunnels and valleys and mountains, everything, everything that you like and everything that we love. But coming to Bergen, there is a private eye, a detective, in the tradition of Chandler, in the tradition of Macdonald, and his name in the novels is Vari Veum. Varg Veum, very difficult to pronounce for non-Scandinavian speakers, I understand. Varg, the V-A-R-G, the first name actually means wolf in Norwegian. The novel that you could actually start reading Gunnar Staalesen's work with is Cold Hearts. On a frosty January day in Bergen, private detective Vari Veum is visited by a prostitute. Her friend Margrethe has disappeared and hasn't been seen for days. Before her disappearance, something had unsettled her. She turned away a customer and returned to the neighborhood in terror. Shortly after taking the case, Veum is confronted with a brutal, uneasy reality. He soon finds the first body, and it won't be the last either. His investigations lead him into a dark subculture where corrupted idealism has had deadly consequences. All of the novels of Gunnar Staalesen I would recommend to you, and there are also movies made out of these novels, and I think you might see them on Netflix. I don't know what Netflix in the US or in Canada or in the UK offers, but I think you might see them on Netflix or another cable channel, because I saw them all on cable, but I also saw them all on television years before. Really good films and really good books. And one of my favorite crime authors, and we go to Canada. You know that I love Canada because of its nature, because of its vastness, because of its politeness. Canadians are so polite, that's at least what Americans say. And the author that I want to bring to your heart as a thriller author is Giles Blunt, or Giles Blunt. The novel is 40 Words for Sorrow, and Giles Blunt, he has a team of investigators, like everyone who writes sequel crime novels has a team, and this team consists of Inspector John Cardinal, Detective John Cardinal, and his assistant is Lisa. Lisa In the quiet Canadian town of Algonquin Bay, a frozen body has been found in an abandoned mine shaft. She's quickly identified as Katie Pine, a teenager who had disappeared months ago. At the time, Detective John Cardinal insisted that Katie was no ordinary runaway. His relentless pursuit and refusal to give up on the case got him demoted from homicide. But now, the Canadian Police Force wants Cardinal back on the case with a new associate by his side. And as these two untrusting partners gather evidence of a serial murder spree, a pair of sociopaths is closing in on the next victim. That is 40 Words of Sorrow, highly recommendable novels. All of the novels by Giles or Giles Blunt I recommend to you. Really a great Canadian author. And I think Algonquin Bay doesn't really exist. It's supposed to be a town like 5 or 6 hours north of Toronto. And now we dive into madness again for the next title, and that is Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane. Dennis Lehane is one of my favorite crime authors as well, and he has written several pieces of literature, because he has written private eye stories, he has written police stories, he has written stories about the 30s and 40s and 50s, and he has written Shutter Island that was made into a movie by Martin Scorsese with Leonardo DiCaprio in the leading role, as you might know. The year is 1954. U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels and his new partner Chuck All have come to Shutter Island, home of Ashcliff Hospital for the Criminally Insane, to investigate the disappearance of a patient. Multiple murderess Rachel Solando is loose somewhere on this remote and barren island, despite having been kept in a locked cell under constant surveillance. As a killer hurricane relentlessly bears down on them, a strange case takes on even darker, more sinister shades. With hints of radical experimentation, horrifying surgeries, and lethal counter-moves made in the cause of a covert shadow war. No one is going to escape. Shutter Island unscathed, because nothing at Ashcliff Hospital is what it seems. But then neither is Teddy Daniels. I think that the book is far better than the movie, although I love Martin Scorsese, that I can tell you. And here's the end. No, here's not the end, because there's another poem for you. At the end there's another poem, and I'm going to celebrate this for you in German, I hope. So you might not understand what I read now, but since it was written in German, and since it was one of Germany's greatest poets of all time, you can look up the, I sent a link, I put a link to the English translation of the poem down below, okay? Can we do it? And this is Autumn Day by Rainer Maria Rilke, Rainer like me. Rainer Maria Rilke was one of the greatest poets of German literature, and Herbsttag is the title of the poem in German. Herr, es ist Zeit. Der Sommer war sehr groß. Leg deinen Schatten auf die Sonnenuhren und auf den Fluren, lass die Winde los. Befehl, den letzten Früchten voll zu sein, gib ihnen noch 2 südlichere Tage, dränge sie zur Vollendung hin und jage die letzte Süße in den schweren Wein. Wer jetzt kein Haus hat, baut sich keines mehr. Wer jetzt allein ist, wird es lange bleiben, wird wachen, lesen, lange Briefe schreiben und wird in den Alleen hin und her unruhig wandern, wenn die Blätter treiben. Also Rainer Maria Rilke's Autumn Day Herbsttag, translation of the poem with a link down below. And that was the tag. September is my birth month. September is the month. I love that song by Neil Diamond. You know, that's also something about autumn, isn't it? September morn, we danced until the night became a brand new day. 2 lovers playing scenes from some romantic play. September mornings still can make me feel that way. I love that. Oh, it's so beautiful. Neil Diamond is such a great singer. Yeah. But thanks for now. Thanks for today. Have a great day. Bye-bye.